Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I am very, very delighted to be here with you. I'd like to remind you at the top of the show that the reason for the show, the mission behind it, is really to inspire people, listeners and viewers, through inspirational interviews. And I do that because we do live in a beautiful world, despite the fact that it can fool us sometimes, right? And when you look around at the accomplishments of individuals in the collective, and you see the growth of medical care around the world, far less starving people than when I was growing up. My mom used to say, eat all your food on your plate because there's kids starving in China. If there are, God forbid, I think it's a lot less than there used to be. And there's just brilliance happening in so many different areas of our existence and on this world which we share. So I would ask you please to listen very closely to this interview, because I have another very inspiring guest today, and I'm going to tell you about him in 1 second. Before I do that, I'd like you to be conscious of my email at the bottom of my screen and tell you that there are lots of opportunities for advertising on the show, for sponsorship on the show. And all you got to do is be in touch with me, and we can tailor your needs to the show. And like any other show, any other podcast, any other radio or TV show, we need some cash. We all need a little cash. So be forthcoming. Support the show if you like it, and we could do something symbiotic together. Now, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is Jud Newborn. Jud, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much, Avrum, for having me.
Absolutely.
I love what you do. You're really a great guy, humanitarian.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you for saying that. So let me introduce you so people have a sense of who you are and why you're here. Damn it. Welcome to today's episode, folks, where we're honored to have Jud Newborn, an acclaimed historian, speaker, and expert in human rights and Holocaust education. Jud is a New York-based author, lecturer, cultural anthropologist, and curator. He's a pioneer in the creation of Holocaust museums. He helped build New York's Museum of Jewish Heritage, serving as its founding historian and curator. He is known for his co-authored book, Sophie Scholl and the White Rose, an account of the history of the White Rose, a group formed in part by German Christian students, some former Hitler Youth fanatics, who were part of the German anti-Nazi resistance. With decades of experience in preserving and sharing stories that matter, Jud has dedicated his life to ensuring that the lessons of the past are never forgotten. His commitment to using history as a tool for empathy and change is truly inspiring, and we're excited to dive into his journey, insights, and the way in which history can shape our future. So what I want to say first off is I accept your compliment, and I find it to be very gracious, and I am going to reciprocate by telling you that I've interviewed many people, and you get a sense sort of who they are, sometimes through the text that begin the relationship, and then later on through the schmooze itself. And I have to tell you something. I get a feeling in my soul, in my neshama, that you are a very kind human being, Jud Newborn. A very kind human being.
Thank you.
You see yourself as kind?
Yes, I do, because I like people a lot. I like to mentor younger people. In fact, if anybody comes to me for a letter of recommendation for anything, I ask them to send me any information I don't have, and then I write them the best PR recommendation I can, as long as there's some basis to it.
Yes.
It just gives me a good feeling, and I've been an activist for various human rights causes, I didn't get involved in the Holocaust because I wanted to become a Holocaustologist and get a career and a degree and a job. I did it from a deep personal sense of mission, and because I wanted to try and solve the secret of the Holocaust. Why did it happen the way it did? I am a writer, and so I really wanted to write books and things and get that material available to the general public in a way that's accessible. But I did do it for my doctorate for the University of Chicago. So it's a complex analysis. I'm a sociocultural anthropologist and historian, and nobody in the general public knows what that is.
No, we don't know at all. What the hell's that?
Yeah. In the old days, everyone knew who Margaret Mead was. Like, she was
Yes.
very famous, and in those days, anthropology was famous, and she was in like Red Book magazine and everywhere. But anthropology is nothing like that anymore. It's far, far more sophisticated, and it's far, far more difficult. It's like the physics of culture, trying to get at the atomic level, and it's complex. Anyway,
Margaret Mead, she said something I think which is applicable to you in this interview. She said, "Never think that one person, cannot spearhead a great cause, because indeed that's how things happened." And I think that's applicable to you.
yes, and that's one of the great phrases and quotes of an inspirational phrases ever. I love it. I'm glad I mentioned her, because we might not have said that.
Yes, indeed.
Otherwise, you don't bring up Margaret Mead much.
No, it's true. We don't bring up Margaret Mead. But I think that's a little bit sad about our past, insofar as there have been great people who have come through this world for a very short time, just like we will, and have accomplished just brilliant things, and they're not known of at all, right?
Generations come and go, and the cultural knowledge is no longer shared. They share new cultural knowledge, I guess. You have to have the historians and people who just don't have to be a historian to care about popular culture, history, what's come and gone, and maintain awareness of it one way or another, because the heroes of the past and the accomplishments of the past, artists and intellectuals, it remains important. Some things bear the live on because they're so important. Some things kind of go by the wayside, but there's still things that should be part of our cultural literacy.
Jud, let me ask you a question. We all have our own way of thinking. I do a podcast every week with Rabbi Shlomo Gomorrah. He's a Talmud scholar, a Torah scholar, and we do the portion of the Torah a week through the guise of classic literature. So last week, as an example, we did Parshat Vayera, the portion Vayera, and we did it through the lens of the book Exodus by Leon Uris. Rabbi Gomorrah says that the way he looks at life is, the way he studies the Torah, is he reads it as a story. And then he dives into it a little bit further in terms of the intellectual aspects and components of it. What do the great scholars say about it? And then he applies it to our world today. And on the flip side, he'll read the news of today and yesterday, and he'll say, okay, what would the Torah say about this? So as a historian, as a Holocaust scholar, knowing the past as you do the present, and probably having a vision for the future, what is your mindset? How do you think?
I'm not quite sure how do I relate that to what you just said?
How do you think? In other words, when you read the news today, do you look back 40, 50, 60, 70 years and say, yeah, there's lots of evidence of the cyclical nature of our existence?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's happening right now with politics in the United States, which affects the whole world. When I read about what's happening with Donald Trump, and not just Trump, but the machine behind him, I see authoritarianism making an ugly appearance in America. The MAGA movement is a mass movement, a populist mass movement. And I think about Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, not because I see these things as comparable, but I think about the rise, that how fragile democracy is. And it's been undermined in many times and places. And right now we're in a period where the rise of the far right, which includes anti-Semitism as well as other elements, is coming back, and it's not just happening in the United States. It's happening in many countries, and don't ask me why it's coming about now again, although I may have some thoughts on that. But it's scary. I'm very and disturbing, and very, very distasteful, to say the least. I don't want it to grab hold and become entrenched, but I think it is. So yes, I think about that cyclically.
You don't just attribute it to the far right, do you? I mean, there's an awful lot of smarmy stuff going on the far left too.
Yeah, I used to think of myself as a progressive leftist, and now I realize I am a progressive leftist, and they aren't. I'm very disturbed by the instant reaction by campuses, students in the campuses, to what the Hamas assault. It's unbelievable that they turned on a dime and immediately started going into this very rigid ideology of colonial settler states. And let's explain. We have to understand why it happened. We have to go back to 1948 to explain why this. It's apologetics. So that disturbs me. The whole identity politics bothers me. I wasn't paying attention to it, and now I realize how I feel betrayed by those who I might have had some sympathy with. So yes, I think the far left has gotten very rigid. Some of the approaches they have were analytical tools I used from the University of Chicago, to try to understand aspects of the world, power relations, etc. But they weren't part of they weren't identity politics, and they did guide some of my moral approach to things, or ethical. But I didn't have this very rigid and naive idea, which is supposedly sophisticated intellectually. It isn't. And there's a good reason why they focus on Israel and Palestine and not other parts of the world. You want me to say what I think? Well, Jews and Christians have always been dialectically defined by one another, right? The Jew is not the Christian. He's the marked category in Western society, and it's become globalized, which is another thought that I could talk about. And so it's part of our culture that we would focus on the Jew as a marked category, but because of the centuries of anti-Semitism, when you focus on, let's say, so-called anti-Zionism, that is focusing on Israel as a colonial settler state, I'm trying to say the Jew is a marked category in Western society,
by definition.
By definition. And so we are focused on them and involved with them. And also Israel and Palestine, the Palestinian conflict is a nexus of U.S. interests. So it all comes together. But there's so much going on in the rest of the world that these young students and other so-called progressive intellectuals don't focus on. They definitely don't get hysterical about it the way they do about the Palestinian Jewish thing. They don't invest their identities in it. In Darfur, Nicholas Kristof, the great human rights columnist for the New York Times, tried week after week after week with columns in the Times to awaken the world to the atrocities that were going on in Darfur how many decades ago. And finally, the world started to pay attention. Well, it's come back. It was going on for a long time. It's horrendous now. The blacks did not, in Africa, in southern Sudan, have not in any way provoked anything. They're simply being attacked by the Muslim, you have the word for it.
Janjaweed.
And they're using tactics of brutality that are as bad as Hamas in terms of, and worse, as bad, slaughtering babies, raping women. It's horrendous. Nobody cares. The students don't care. If you tell them about it, they will not get as upset as they have done about the Israel-Palestinian thing. because it's not Jews. It's not part of their identity, and that's not part of their intellectual awareness. Or so it doesn't get attention. We don't relate to those people. They have nothing to do with us, as it were, nor the Uyghur in China.
Yes.
They're undergoing, and they have been undergoing, horrendous ethnic cleansing. Their culture's being wiped out. We don't know what's going on, where millions are in these awful rehabilitation camps. There are cameras of surveillance, even in the homes of Uyghur families. It's unbelievable. And the Han Chinese are being dressed up as Uyghur and pretending to be Uyghur and saying, "Oh, this is wonderful. We're all part of this wonderful culture." Nobody identifies with that in the West. Nobody on the campuses identify with that. They also don't identify with their own colonial settler heritage.
Mm-hmm.
They want to go back to 1948. It's not that long ago, they would say. Well, in the 50s and 60s and later, in the United States, we were still treating Native Americans poorly. We did nothing to rehabilitate them based upon the way in which we destroyed their cultures after having killed them off in many ways. And now they suffer from diabetes and unemployment and horrible things. And listen, I'm on Long Island. You'd think, well, there can't be any Native Americans here. Well, there is a Native American reservation, the Shinnecock.
Yeah.
They're not doing great. And in New England, of course, and you have in Canada, your First Peoples, who have been mistreated in so many ways. And it's not that long ago, and to some extent it still happens, and they're living with the consequences. How come the students in Stony Brook University on Long Island don't rise in protest against what's happening to the Shinnecock Indians and in their doorstep, of whose land they're occupying? Their university is on stolen land, and their homes are on stolen land. And how would they feel if there was an underground in the Shinnecock Reservation who justifiably feel that their culture has been destroyed, they've been victimized, and they dug tunnels underneath the reservation, and then they had developed a fanatical ideology, and they suddenly came out and murdered everybody in the suburbs? Would they say, "Oh, well, but we have to understand why they did it. They murdered my mother because it was all of this oppression that they've experienced"? It wouldn't happen that way. So, and I'm not sorry. I just want to say I'm not excusing Netanyahu's tactics. I am very much against Netanyahu. I'm against the settler movement. And I think there has to be some kind of a solution to the situation. Anyway,
it's an interesting point that you made, that it's not part of the students' intellectual wherewithal.
right.
And when you said that, I thought about I'd worked many years together with the Native community here in Canada. Of course, you're familiar with the residential schools so on. When I approached a number of different Jewish entities to help kickstart that movement and to be part of it and to finance and so on, many of them were not interested whatsoever, not interested at all. And it bothered me greatly. And today you're kind of bringing it at home for me. You know what? They'll argue, well, listen, we have enough of our own problems, right?
Right.
But I think the main point that you made and that I'm repeating is that it's just not part of their thinking.
It's
like the Congo today. Since 1996, there have been 6 million people have been killed. That 6 million is a number that we know. No one's talking about
6 million First Peoples in Canada?
Congo, in the Congo.
In the Congo, yeah. It's horrendous. Oh God, what I've read about what they've done in the Congo and how they tried to recruit young people in the most horrendous ways to murder their own families and brutalize them. It's an it's atrocious. But these things are not on our radar. They have to be put on our radar, and we have to care. And right now, the only thing, I'm sorry, listen, I did this I did a keynote address for a new UN NGO that was about to fight anti-Semitism. It came about after October 7th, but it was long in the workings. And it was only accredited by one vote. 39 against 40, which is horrendous. The UN is rife with anti-Semitism and has been for many years. And I gave what I think is the first lecture on the Holocaust ever at the UN in 1995,
Yes.
just at the height of the Balkan crisis, and Srebrenica, the famous massacre, had taken place. While the UN stood idly by, and the Serbians, who were fascists, had the weapons. And I had to be sneaked into the UN to an existing program that was being sponsored by the U.S. Holocaust Museum, the Israeli Embassy, and an organization within the UN, and some outside organization. So the persons in charge sneaked me in, and they divided the program in half and put me in the middle to do a lecture on Jewish anti-Nazi resistance.
Yes.
And because the Arab bloc otherwise wasn't letting anybody get in and do anything relating to Jews, Israel, Holocaust. And so I gave this lecture, and I said, when I came to lighting figurative candles, number 5 for the Warsaw Ghetto freedom fighters abandoned by the world, I said, and let's also light this candle figuratively for the Bosnian Muslims who have been abandoned by the world, while the United Nations, you folks, stood idly by doing nothing and watched them being massacred. And when you do your post-mortem on Friday, let's hope you finally do something. That was what I said. Then I continued with my program about just Jews. Nothing about the present otherwise than that. So the Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Ghali, was outraged.
He was,
and that a bona fide Holocaust scholar would call it a near genocide. I called it ethnic cleansing, because if something really is called a genocide, by their charter, they're supposed to do something.
Yes.
So he didn't like that, Boutros Ghali was just terrible. So I had some fun with that, and I was supposed to get a $50 honorarium.
You didn't get it? You didn't get it?
They withheld it because I was supposed to be neutral, they said. Nobody told me to do anything or say anything.
That $50 must be worth a lot of money today. You should see if you can get it. Hey, listen, I interviewed Michal Cutler, who is one of Israel's envoys fighting anti-Semitism around the world. And she also spoke recently at the United Nations, and she was strong, very, very powerful. And she, hit her fist on the table and said, in this building, you legitimized anti-Semitism. You legitimized hatred towards the state of Israel, calling Zionism racism. And she did not hold back, man. And you see the faces of the United Nations members, right? They're so perturbed by this, right? God forbid you should call us out on our bullshit, right? But she stood her ground, Jud. She stood her ground.
Well, imagine I see an ethnic cleansing going on in Bosnia. And it took me a few days to decide what I was going to do. Yeah. Because I realized that I was going to be in front of people who considered diplomacy to be doing nothing and saying nothing about anything. And I thought, gee, what am I going to do now? I can just do what these folks have asked me to do. But how can I look myself in the mirror if I don't say something? So I was thinking about it. And then when I went there, I said, yeah, of course I've got to say something. So I did. And
good for you.
And with this NGO, the new one, I talked about, they wanted me to do in 20 minutes. What is anti-Semitism all about? Where did it come from? Or what is it? Plus, what's Hamas? Plus, the White Rose student anti-Nazi resistance in Germany. Plus, how do I relate that to campuses, students today? Well, I did it because I'm very good at compressing things.
Good for you.
I do the whole story of Jewish anti-Nazi resistance in 30 minutes with loads of slides. But in any event, and it's fun. And I come from a showbiz family, so I don't want to give a lecture that I wouldn't want to attend. So I make it fun and interesting and exciting and dramatic. But in any event,
I want to touch on a few things that have occurred in your life or that you have initiated. Let me tell my viewers and listeners just a little bit more about you. You were awarded your PhD with distinction by the University of Chicago. Lots of stuff going on in Chicago today with immigrants or migrants. Following 3 years of adventurous field work as Fulbright and Woodrow Wilson National Fellow, including hunting down former SS officers and working undercover during communist martial law in Poland. Tell us about that, Jud.
Well, I got to Germany, based in Munich, to do my doctoral field work on Nazi Germany, and the focus was the form and meaning of the death camps and how that was the core motor to the Nazis creating their millennial folk community that would last for forever, and by purifying the Jews. It was, again, there a dialectic. By destroying Jews and Jewish families, the German Aryan family would arise. Anyway, so next thing you know, some time has passed. I still haven't gone to Poland to look at the sites of the death camps and do research there. And the Polish communists declare martial law. Lech Walesa was the trade unionist who was trying to throw off the communists. This was 1980, the end of 81. 6 months later, I wangled a visa somehow from a very sympathetic guy in the Bonn, and then the location of the West German, capital then, the embassy, Polish embassy, and I wasn't supposed to get it. And he wangled it for me, and for a couple of weeks, I was able to get into Poland, and I was one of the few people who could get in because the borders of Poland had been sealed. So I had a little assistance from the State Department getting me a special passport. And I went in there, and meanwhile, friends in Munich who were connected with Solidarity, which was the freedom movement, said, Jud, since you're one of the few people who can get in there, you have to work with us. You have to help us. I said, yeah, what do I have to do? And they told me who I had to meet and what I had to do. And I said, okay, put your money where your mouth is. If you're going to be, you got to do it. And I confess, I was young. And I thought, oh, this would be a great adventure. And also, I'll be a spy, right? I was a spy.
And everybody wants to be a spy. Yeah.
Of course, it's fun to be a spy.
I know. I'd love it.
To the good side, not the wrong side.
Not the rotten guys. Yeah.
No. Yeah. And I wasn't going to be paid. So, I wasn't like whatever. And also a young writer, right? I was away from the university. I was supposed to be doing my field work, but I was also writing and thinking, oh, thank God I'm away from that pressure cooker at the University of Chicago. I can live a little. And so I thought I'd get a good article out of it. Yeah. So I tell you, when I was at the Berlin Zoo station, which is the division between West Germany and East Germany, a friend accompanied me, and he said, you are now going to be one little cell of Western freedom and democracy in a world of authoritarianism and communism and in a police state. He says, so take care of yourself.
Yeah, good luck.
And it was true. As soon as I got across the border, it was totally different. Functionaries treated you like you were a piece of garbage. Because they had the power. Didn't matter who you were. Didn't matter how exalted you might be in anybody's mind. I was thrown off the train once because they claimed I didn't have the right ticket. And then this was fun. There was a curfew. You weren't supposed to be out after a certain hour. And I was kicked off the train because I was supposedly didn't have the right ticket, which I did. And they left me in the middle of nowhere. And as the train started to move, I went back to the train, and the people in my compartment, who were all Poles, we had become friends. They said, give us your bag, give us your bag. So I shoved this bag, and they pulled me into the compartment while the train was moving.
Oh my gosh, really?
It was great. And then I got to eventually to Krakow, which is near Auschwitz. And this part was not spying. I went to I had to do my own work, right? I was risking it, but this is how it is. So I went to the State Museum in the Auschwitz I. There's 3 camps there's Auschwitz I, the first original camp, which was an old caserne, military, base in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which they helped refurbish as a concentration camp using Jewish slave labor. Then and then there's Auschwitz II, Birkenau. That's the death camp. That's the enormous death camp that they built to mass murder the Jews of Europe, with 4 crematoria and gas chambers. So I spoke to the head of the museum, the Polish State Museum in the main camp, and I said, okay, listen, I need to go over to Birkenau, Auschwitz-Birkenau, along the train tracks that lead to that gateway of death that we've seen in pictures, to the ramp where they chose people for death or life, or with labor, death through labor. And I said, how late is it open? He said, oh, it never closes. It's always open. Don't worry. You can stay there as long as you can stay there as long as you like. So I said, great. So I walked along the tracks. It was very, I was deeply moved, and to go through the gateway of death, where the trains would roll up to the ramp and the SS would say, like Mengele, you to the right, you to the left, you for gassing, you for slave labor. By the way, slave labor meant, it was a program, Vernichtung durch Arbeit, mass extermination through labor. They designed the system so that after 3 months you would be essentially a walking skeleton, ready to be gassed. In any event, so I go in there, and I want to tell you, it was May. There were a couple of barracks that were standing, and the rest were just these chimneys that were left from what had been wooden barracks that were actually refurbished horse stalls, that they put bunks in, wooden bunks, flat, hard bunks, 3 tiers, and they just shoved people in there like turnips. Jews were like turnips. Things with no feeling, no life, in stalls that were supposed to be for just a couple of horses, and they crammed them in there. But I'm just free associating now. Meanwhile, they had air-conditioned kennels for the German Shepherd dogs that we used to, just harm Jews. Anyway, so I'm walking through the camp. It's May. There are grasses high up to my waist. There are beautiful wildflowers amid the grasses. And I'm walking along, I'm thinking, my God, this place is beautiful. And I'm like, this is very strange. What a contradiction. And then all of a sudden, a pheasant broke from the grass at my feet. I almost had a heart attack. And then I walked to one of the standing barracks. And as I came to the entrance, a hare bounded out. I'm thinking, oh my God, there's life in this place.
A rabbit, yeah.
A rabbit. And then as I walked through this barrack, at the end of the barrack, there was a rosette of brown leaves and a bird skeleton. And it was perfect. I thought, this is so strange. Then I moved through the camp, and all of the rest of the barracks, you just saw chimneys, hundreds and hundreds of chimneys, which hardly gave any heat to the people in the wooden barracks, which had been taken apart. But it was a bizarre landscape. I made my way to the deepest crematorium, number 5, way, way back. There's acres and acres here. And it was getting darker and darker. And I was standing finally on the grounds of the crematorium. And I could barely see at this point. So I took a 35 millimeter plastic canister and I brushed in whatever was under my feet to see what it was later. I could imagine what it might be, and I sealed it. And then I looked around and said, oh my God, I got to get out of here. Yeah. So I started walking back to the gateway.
Well, were you panicking at this point?
I was very uncomfortable.
It was dark. It was ominous, right?
It was dark. It was ominous, and I could feel the ghosts turning.
You could feel it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was no longer numb, which I was the whole time I was there. Now I was getting very scared. Just, it was emotionally I wanted to get out of there.
You had to get out.
I was walking, and I said, stay calm, but I was walking faster and faster. When I finally got to the gateway of death and the fences, it was blocked.
Hey.
And I said, oh my, he told me it would be open forever. And
Yeah.
here it is. I'm locked in. I'm locked into Auschwitz at night. It's pitch black. So there was a 10-foot tall wire fence. I threw my backpack over it. I climbed up the fence. I jumped over, hurt my ankles. And then made my way back to Auschwitz I, where I was being housed in the former SS barracks.
Boy, you're kidding.
This is 1982. This is before Auschwitz was a place of pilgrimage and tours and movies being made there. There was stuff coming out of the ground, that spoons and things that people had brought with them to supposedly be resettled. And when I got into the SS barracks in my room, I turned on the light. I opened up the canister, and inside were no doubt the mixed ashes of how many, 1,000 souls, and a perfect preserved child's finger bone.
Yeah.
And I kept this canister with me, in front of me on my desk later, to remind myself that in writing up my analysis of the Holocaust, the death camps, the whole process, this was not because I wanted to get some degree. This was a mission, and there was an irreducible reality, which was the mass murder of Jews. This is not some kind of academic exercise, nor is it something that you're going to see as entertainment in some movie. This was a reality that was inescapable, and I must never lose sight of it. So I kept that in front of me while I was writing, as well as a saying from the Baal Shem Tov. God's gift is a world that is new to us every morning, and a person should believe he is reborn each day. And I guess that kept me going.
Sort of the juxtaposition of the two.
Yeah.
You were 5 years old when you first got introduced to the Holocaust by finding a picture of family members who had been gassed, and you showed it to your grandmother. Tell us what she said to you.
Well, the picture was buried under a pile of blankets. I was digging around where I shouldn't have been digging. And I brought it over to my grandmother. I was excited. I made a discovery. It was an old sepia film picture on like thick cardboard, Yeah. And I saw like 3 generations of people, older, middle-aged boy and girl, and nicely posed. And I said, Grandma, who are these people? Look what I found. She just looked at it for a second and she turned away. And she said, put it back. Put it back. I said, what happened to them? Don't ask. Hitler burnt them all. And she wouldn't look at it, and I had to put it back. Her face was red. And then I had this feeling of, I was like stunned. I said, who's Hitler? Hitler burned them? He burnt people my grandmother loved and cared about? And it opened a hole in me, in my gut somewhere. And it smoldered, and it grew. And then new things happened as I got older that started to fill in what it was about, but it didn't fill in the hole, because the hole just got bigger and bigger. And it fit together with stories my mother had told me and how the Holocaust affected her and so forth. And it led me ultimately to want to focus on it and work on it and explain it. Tell you about my mother.
Yeah, tell us about your mom. Fascinating woman.
My mother was beautiful. She was gentle, and she was a singer. And in 1945, when she got out of high school, they were poor. Parents were grocers in a little, mom and pop grocery.
Yeah,
so she was taking singing lessons, but she also had to work. So she worked many jobs, Western Union. She did the night shift at the PM Newswire, which was a left liberal afternoon newspaper. There were a lot of newspapers in New York then. Now there's nothing. There's like 2. Anyway, 3. So she was on the night shift, the lobster shift, and she was, looking at the teletype that brought up where the news was being, transmitted. And she was singing quietly in German, probably Mozart or Schubert, to the other older women there who liked to hear her sing. And she sees Allies enter Ohrdruf concentration camp. That was the first concentration camp to be liberated. April 1945. Bodies found of Jews stacked like cordwood.
Mhm.
And she said, "Oh my God, this must be what happened to Mama's family." And she threw up and she went home. Uh, she was studying music with German Jewish refugees between 45 and 48, some quite prominent. She studied with Siegfried Landau, a composer, a conductor, with Julius Rudel, the young Julius Rudel, who became the director of the New York State Opera and all of those opera stars. He was a young refugee, and I can't tell you what. When my mother sang, she really has a beautiful voice. You can hear it. You can. It's on. I put the recordings up, and it was 78s mostly. I had them digitized by the National Yiddish Radio Archive.
Her name was Rita Sorrell.
Rita Sorrell was her stage name. Rita Cohen. Rita Sorrell.
Mhm.
Uh,
Owen Sorrell. Yeah.
yeah. If we free associate, she was, if you don't mind, hopping around.
Go ahead.
She lived in Bay Ridge, 90% Italian, some Swedish or Norwegian, but mostly Italian. She was in school. She was practically the only Jewish girl. And the principal, strangely enough, was Jewish.
Mhm.
And her name was Rebecca. And Rebecca Cohen. And the principal came to my grandparents' house. And they were all from Eastern Europe, of course. They were from Ukraine and Poland. And he said, "What are you doing to this girl? With a name like Rebecca, they're going to torture her.
Yes.
Change her name legally. Make it Rita." That's
Mhm.
like Italian. And my grandparents changed her name legally to Rita.
Really?
Yes, really.
Wow.
So
Interesting.
she became Rita Cohen, and they called her Rita Ice Cream Cohen. But she was very popular eventually because she was beautiful, and she was one of the stars of the high school, New Utrecht High School. A lot of famous people went to New Utrecht High School, and she was, the star of the Glee Club. She did all of the solos, and so she was studying with Julius Rudel. And as Jesus, I'm free associating. It's ridiculous. Can I do that?
Yeah. No, that's what I love about this show. Just free associate.
She told me how
Who's going to call you out? Nobody.
she was singing Mozart, and he was conducting something for the Hunter College Playhouse. And as she was singing, the first time you met her, he was at the piano, and as she was singing, he went like this.
Mhm.
And I got up and was standing and playing and looking at her.
Yes.
And I don't want to. I don't know if I can say this or not, because my mother would never say such a thing until I was an adult. But someone said to her, when he sees you sing, he has an orgasm.
Wait, you're kidding? Really?
Really?
And
That's what she
that's the
said.
mark. That's the mark of a good voice, I guess.
Yeah. Well, she had a beautiful. Actually, I played her recordings for Martha Feldman, who's the chairman of the University of Chicago Musicology Department. And she said, when she heard them, she said, "What happened? This is a grade A singer. This is like Bidou Sayal's voice. What happened?" I said, "She became an Eisenhower housewife. That's what happened."
Yes.
But anyway.
Was she a happy woman?
A what?
Was she a happy woman?
Was she happy? She married my father, a World War II chief squadron navigator in the Bloody Illusion campaign, and betrayed herself by not pursuing her career, because she had a lot of possibilities. She auditioned for Brigadoon, which was being done in 1947, and she almost got the part until she wouldn't sleep with Cheryl Crawford, the woman who was the lesbian. She was a famous lesbian, and she was a famous member of the group theater. And so she was the one who was doing Brigadoon, and my mother auditioned, and she said, "Rita, that your voice is wonderful, but Brigadoon is a ballet musical also with dancing. Can you dance?" And my mother said, "Well, I can just do ballroom dancing, Ms. Crawford." And she said, "Well, have dinner with me tonight,
Really?
and we'll talk it over." And my mother went backstage, and she said to the girls, Cheryl Crawford invited me for dinner, and she's going to arrange dancing lessons for
dance
me.
lessons. Yeah.
And the girl said, Rita, don't have dinner with her. She's going to put the make on you.
Yes.
And my mother didn't understand it at first because she's a nice Jewish girl and she didn't know about those things. But then she realized what it was about. And she said, I hope these girls weren't trying to sabotage her. Anyway, she said, Ms. Crawford, I'm afraid I can't have dinner. My father waits for me at the trolley car station in Bray Ridge, usually with a glass of milk. And Cheryl Crawford became cold as ice and said, if you cannot dance, you cannot be in Brigadoon. That was that. She had it from
go back to your father, Saul.
Okay, my father was a chief squadron navigator in World War II. Greatest years of his life, that generation, the Great Generation. So his job was to get a full squadron of B-27s that were going out to bomb Japanese occupied islands in the Aleutian chain, the only part of the United States that was occupied by the Japanese. Help get to the bombing sites, right? Target them, and then come back with get the whole squadron back safely. But they had to land at a landing strip that ended. It was short and ended in a mountain, and there was no radar in those days, and there were whiteouts. So if they saw the moon, through the whiteout, they would say, "Oh, you beauty," because then they could start to figure things out and how to do the computations. So he had to have different computations for each plane as they came in and get them down. So that was a big responsibility. But you know what? He wanted to be a pilot. He went to pilot school before that. And the day that he was supposed to have his third, whatever you call it, flying lesson where he shows off that he's now capable, the commander in charge of him told him the wrong time and day. And when he didn't show up when he was allegedly supposed to, he said, I'm sorry, you'll wash out. You're going to have to be a navigator because Jews are good with money. Numbers. Jews are good with numbers. Yes. And that's what happened in World War II. A lot of Jews were shunted into being navigators and things that had to do with numbers, mathematics, computations. Throughout the rest of his life, when he saw a plane flying above, he would look up wistfully. Anyway, so
your parents' lives took sad twists.
Yeah. Well, he carried throughout World War II in the Pacific a ad in the New York Times. There was a whole campaign to wake up the world to what was happening to Jews in the Holocaust. And they had regular full-page ads with wonderful drawings by the great Arthur Szyk. Mm-hmm. And there was one that showed a Jewish soldier with a star in his helmet, he made it up. And he was holding in his arms the remnants of the European Jews, a rabbi with a Torah and buildings burning and crying mother, and it was all in his hands. And Szyk wrote under it, to those of my brethren who died with their boots on, my undying and fight with the boot, my undying love and devotion. My father folded it up, put it in his wallet, and he had to go where his country sent him, not to Europe, but to the Pacific, but he had it in his wallet the entire time of the war to remind him of what was going on there. And I still have it.
Were you close with your parents? Were they good to you?
My mother was very tender and very nurturing. And she said, follow your dreams, because she didn't follow hers. And my father was, having been a military man, he was quite authoritarian. He was, we were like members of the platoon he was ordering around. So he could be quite difficult. And my mother got an ulcer in the early years because she wanted to be singing, and then she was stuck in this little house in the new suburbs on Long Island, which they bought with the GI Bill. And so she got past that, and their marriage was romantic. My father was also quite authoritarian with her too. But so, what did I have a good, happy growing up? A lot of families, it seems to me, nuclear families have a lot of dysfunction, and show me really a family where they all was everything was hunky dory and everybody turned out great. I'd like to meet them, but yeah, it was complicated, and
There are a few. There are a few.
there are a few. Well, I grew up. I got bullied a lot when I was a kid because I was the smallest kid in school until 10th grade. I didn't get bullied. Actually, I didn't get bullied until 10th grade because I hadn't grown and I was transferred to a rough school with a lot of greasers. And
Greasers.
this is that era. And so they picked on me as the youngest kid in school, the smallest kid in school. But I grew over the summer. And then I was okay. So no, I wasn't. I was bullied that 1 year, and it was bad. But otherwise, I had a lot of experiences with anti-Semitism from my earliest years. When all this stuff was happening after October 7th, I said, I'm going to make a list of every anti-Semitic experience I've had in my life. Some people who are on the Holocaust Association of Holocaust Organizations said, oh, I didn't experience much anti-Semitism. I think, yes. Well, where were you? Why did I experience it? So I'm age 6. And most of the people in our community in this new suburbs, that were built on potato farms, were lower middle class people, and mostly of Italian and Irish background, not educated. And I want to tell you, when I was 6 years old, my father told me that a man down the street, I'm not pointing at any ethnic groups, but this is how it was. Anti-Semitism was rife in America and taken for granted throughout. It reached its height in 1944 when the Jews of Hungary were being pushed into the gas chambers so fast and so hard that they cracked the crematoria and had to dig big ditches to burn them in. That's when anti-Semitism was at its height. There was Mr. McGee said to my father, who was always working with the community positively, and he was a really loved guy, said, Saul, those Jews, blah, blah, blah. I said, but not you, Saul. You're a white Jew.
You're a good Jew.
A white Jew. Were
Jew.
Jews white? Were we Caucasians? Were we whites?
I don't know.
Did we have to become whites? Because we were another race, right? Racism. Yeah. And then a woman on the street who said to me, her daughter was telling me Jews killed Christ. So I said to her mother, Karen is saying Jews killed Christ. It's not true. And her mother was so refined and nice. She said, well, there were probably a few bad Jews there. And it just went on and on and on and on. Up to when I came back from Germany. I came back from Germany and I was doing some work on St. Patrick's Day in New York, agenting books for somebody, a German agent. And there were these guys walking ahead of me on the street in Manhattan, and I heard them say, Hitler should have finished them all off, those Jews. And I ran up to them, and, it's like, I'm going to get beat up. I ran up to them, and I said, I heard what you guys said, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, and here I am on your day wearing green. And they said, oh, we're Italian. And they went into they ran into this doorway. So I got very, very feisty as I got older.
Well, good for you. I was born in Kitchener, Ontario, which used to be called Little Berlin. It's an hour away from Toronto. And my father was an Orthodox rabbi. So I would wear my kippah to kindergarten at 5 years old. And I would be chased around the schoolyard. I remember this little Polish kid was wearing suspenders. He didn't speak any English. And he was yelling these awful things at me. You just know they're terrible things. Doesn't matter what language. And I came home and I told my father, Dad, I'm not wearing my kippah to school anymore. And, to his credit, he said, okay. One day I was walking with a friend of mine. He was from a German family, Helmut. His name was Helmut. And he turned to me after we had both bought hamsters. And he said to me, I know, the cute little things. My hamster gave birth that night, 12 babies, and then subsequently ate them all. But he turned to me and he said to me, he says Hitler didn't finish the job. He was 8 years old, and I was 8 years old. And I'll be
Well,
honest with you, Judd, I didn't quite know what he meant.
well,
I didn't know
understand.
what he meant. The next day he came up to me and he apologized for what he had said. And I wasn't clear on that because where had he learned such a thing and who told him to apologize? Both
Right.
happened in his household? I don't know.
It's hard to say. There was a Nazi Hitler Youth camp on Long Island uh, called Camp Siegfried. And I still want to infiltrate this. There's still old buildings there, and I want to see if they have any Nazi artifacts in their attics. But I have something. I have an anti-Semitic children's book that is absolutely diabolical because it's beautiful, beguiling, colorful images that have
Good,
told
good.
you life with anti-Semitism.
That's terrible.
Uh,
Tell me something. Are you fearless
am I fearless?
or are you frightened, but you do it anyway?
I used to be
I've,
frightened a lot, but I decided that I'm fearless. But I still am frightened. When I ran up to those guys, I thought, "What am I doing? They're going to
yes,
beat me up."
yes, right.
But I thought, I can't let them get away with it. So I had to risk it. And also, when you get angry, I wouldn't hurt anybody. I mean, if I would fight back, but when you get angry and about something that's important, that gets you through the fear.
True.
I was afraid when I was coming back from Poland, I had contraband. I had all this stuff that I was supposed to bring back of information to deliver to Radio Free Europe's Polish desk to help Solidarity out, pieces for print, specifications for printing press parts and where to send them and all this kind of stuff. And I also had contraband because a nice guy who was not part of this whole deal. His wife was in Munich. She had a daughter there. They needed children's clothes. She didn't have much money. She wanted her husband to be invited to the West to work, but you couldn't be invited to the West unless his papers were already on the West. So I had to smuggle his papers out of Poland. And he said, "You please take children's clothes. My daughter needs these children's clothes." I said, "It's on the list here that it's contraband because run out of children's clothes very easily in a economy where they only had strawberries. All of a sudden, there's nothing in the controlled economies. There's nothing in the store, and then there's only strawberries. Or in the department store, there's nothing except one kind of coat, and everybody has to get the same coat because anyway." So he wanted me to take the children's clothes. So when I was at the border between Poland and East Germany, the Polish secret police were not as good as the East Germany. East Germany the entire country was a concentration camp. And there was a woman who was in charge of, I don't know what you call them. She was checking everybody out at the border. And she was opening other people's suitcases. And I had put all of my books about the Holocaust from Poland on top because I knew the East Germans had this myth that they were the communists who opposed the Nazis, even though they had actually participated with them. And they made their own country into an oppressive state.
Yes.
So I figured that if I have those books on top, I can maybe divert her because I had the other stuff right under. So I thought, oh my God, she wanted me to open my case. I opened it. I said, "These books are all because I was at the Auschwitz Museum and I'm studying the Holocaust, which, you guys proposed it." And I blah, 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 blah.
That? Yeah. Did you say that?
She said,
Yeah.
She said, "Okay." So at that point, I was very scared. I go, "Ugh." And they're going to grab me and put me, interrogate me and take all my research material and God knows what. By the way, my mother, when I was in Poland for 3 weeks, I said, "Mom, don't try to call. You won't be able to reach me." There's no texting in those days. I was all alone,
Yeah.
which was much better. It's ridiculous to think that I would be in Poland under these circumstances and send a text message, say, "Hi, how you doing?"
All's well.
Right. Or,
Baruch Hashem.
The thing is, you were alone. The world was, things were far apart in those days, and it was more dramatic and real. Anyway, I knew if I didn't tell her, she would have said, after a week she hadn't heard from me, she would have said, "Okay, we're going to call Jacob Javits, the Senator Javits, and we know him, and we're going to call every embassy and every consulate and we're going to scour Poland and say, where's Jud? Where's Jud?" And I said, "Don't do it." And she didn't do it, but she had to control herself. I'm going to tell you.
At least she didn't come out. My mother would have come out and yelled, Avrum, Avrum, like, and she would have been very strange with the Polish guards. I want to ask you something. We've been free associating a lot, which I quite like. Did you actually find an SS guard through your hunting of Nazis?
I did, but that was only part of my work. But I did want to interview. I wanted to interview perpetrators.
Yes.
So it's not that I was hunting them down like a Nazi hunter to throw them in jail.
Like Wiesenthal, yeah.
Other people did that, and also it was getting pretty late for that. Although this was 1980 to 83. No, what I wanted was to get hold of them, people who did different kinds of things at different levels, different ranks, and I wanted to interview them. So, first of all, Germany has Datenschutz. They protect your private information. So I couldn't, if I wanted to write to a Nazi and ask him to let me interview him, I didn't know where the hell he was. So I had to send my letters for the people I picked out to a special ministry. And the ministry would then forward my letters. And then if anybody responded, I was lucky, and I would interview them if they would say yes. So I wrote very careful letters. By the way, my name on my letters was J. George Newborn, because Jud is in German.
Jud.
The word for Jew is Jude, and Jud is J-U-D. Just stick an E on. But the bad word for Jew is Jud, J-U-D, no E. And they would call someone they called Marx, der Jud Marx Mordecai. Or Billy Joel's grandfather was called Der Jud Joel. He had a department store, and he was Aryanized, and they humiliated him. Anyway, so
you had a pen palship with an SS guy,
right? So yeah, it just reminds me that I had a correspondence with the head of the commandant of Auschwitz's best friend. But anyway, that's another story.
That's lovely.
Yes, lovely.
Yeah. So you hooked up with this SS guy.
Oh yeah. So I called myself George because I didn't want them to know I was Jewish, and I managed to see two guys in prison. One guy, Josef Erber, he was in a high security prison. I had to, put in papers through windows and doors and, little slots. And then I got in there, and wouldn't you know it, I feel like standing up, but I don't think I can do it. This guy comes in and he clicks his heels, right, and he bows to me. And it's like, my God, did they still do that? Well, they did from his generation. I'm Dr. Newborn. Was I doctor? No. Anyway, I wasn't a doctor, but I was like a scholar. And he was ready to do a good bit of work with me. I had kind of said, you would live through one of the most pivotal events in history, and it's very important, and I would like to interview you. I didn't, I had to say something that would not keep them from saying no, but not anything that would lie to them. So I just made it vague. I asked him, I wanted to know what was it like to be working in the camp. He was selecting women for death or life. And he was a little guy. This was the biggest moment in his entire life. This was the high point of his career. Otherwise, he was like, I don't know, a tailor. Anyway, or a laborer. And he was very proud of what he did there. I could tell. He didn't say he was proud. But I said, well, tell me about the work process. And I said, for example, women, the hair was taken off, shaven from the heads of Jewish women. You know what he did? He pointed to a spot way down the middle of his back. And he said, with pride, that's how long some of the braids were of the women whose hair we cut off. Mm-hmm. And it was important to know what work was about, because the entranceway to Auschwitz says work makes free. Arbeit macht frei. So what is that about? Is it cynical, or is it part of the principle of the camp for Germans? Like the sign over the post office in New York that says, neither rain nor snow nor sleet will stop us from doing our thing. People think that Arbeit macht frei was a cynical ploy to make people think that if they work, they'll be liberated, but we're really laughing at them. That's not the case. Anthropologically, I can tell you, it was the motto for the Germans of what the camp was about. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what does work mean for them? Why are they working on Jews to kill them? This gets to the secret of the Holocaust, really. Anyway, so Joseph Erbe came in. He kept on saying to me, I had a Fulbright. He said, your boss Fulbright, he works for those Jews on Wall Street, doesn't he?
Those bastards, yeah.
And I would say, I don't know about that. Fulbright was, not Jewish, and he was a senator, and he kept on trying to get stuff out of me. I thought maybe he thinks I'm Jewish, but he doesn't know for sure. And I said, let him guess, let him wonder. And at the end of the whole thing, I said, do you want to say anything? He says, yes. What happened there was something that should never happen again. I said, well, thank you very much. And that was the end of that. Then I went to a prison nearby in a different province, different state. And I was told Yosef Beretsky, he was volatile, they told me. They said, we'll let you speak with him, but be careful. He can go off all of a sudden with anger, and he's a tough guy, so we'll watch you. So I'm sitting with Yosef Beretsky, and you know what he says to me? And he was angry. He said to me, when I grew up in Czernowitz, Romania, I was an ethnic German. I was a Volksdeutscher. That is, he was a German who was growing up in another country. So he was an ethnic German, but he was somehow less than German to the German Aryans in the SS. Anyway, he grew up, and it was half Jewish, that town. And next door was Mrs. Goldberg. And she would put a challah on the windowsill to cool, and he would smell it. And she would look at him as a little boy and say, Josef, willst du shtickel? Do you want a little piece? So he's talking to me in Yiddish. This guy was like 17, 18. In Auschwitz, his record was so horrible that someone wanted to come with me to interview him. And when she read the record, she said, I'm not coming to see him. There was like a well, concrete well, very, very deep. He'd get some prisoner in there holding by his fingertips and step on his fingers till he fell into the well and drowned. He did brutal things. He murdered people. He was in prison. He said to me, I shouldn't be here. He said, I should be going from school to school telling them how evil Nazism was and what they did to the Jews and what they did to me. Because
Really?
I was just a teenager, and they told me I was a Hottentot because I wasn't fully German. And they took me to Auschwitz to be a guard, and they brainwashed me. They indoctrinated me. The head of indoctrination was a man named Kurt Knittel, and he showed us the Nazi anti-Semitic films, and he told us how evil the Jews were. And don't you think when I left those theaters and those indoctrination sessions, I wanted to give Jews a good kick? He said, you know what? Kurt Knittel is free. He's the culture minister in the city of Darmstadt, and I'm sitting here in prison. And he said, I'm angry about that. I want to go out and talk to the kids in school. And I believed him very much so, because he also gave state witness against the Nazis at Auschwitz at the first German Auschwitz trial in 1957. And he still wound up in prison for life. And all these other more important Germans who did who did awful things were running around free. So I sent him a can of coffee.
Did you?
Yeah, I liked him. Believe it or not, I liked him, which is kind of funny thing to say because I knew what his record was. But I liked the fact that I believed him. And you know what? The other guy, Josef Erber, the nice orderly one, who they told me, oh, he's very nice. Don't worry, he's docile. They used to let him out of prison. They give him. He liked to work. German work on Jews or anywhere else was like very important. So they had like a prisoner art installation at a bank. So they let him go out and walk with a wheelbarrow and take the paintings and put the paintings up. And I was thinking, this docile guy really was involved deeply with what happened there, and he was proud of his days there and cutting off the hair of the women, Jewish women. And this other guy, they say, is volatile and horrible and dangerous, but he's the one who really, really understands what happened there because he himself knew Jews and liked them.
Yes.
And then he was indoctrinated, and he felt very guilty for what he had done.
Listen, I've interviewed survivors of Rwanda who have actually been involved, in various different programs to help bring the Hutus and the Tutsis together. And they met mass murderers. One woman who started up the Holocaust and Genocide Center in Johannesburg, Tully Nates, she was sitting with a guy, a Hutu, who had wiped out almost an entire village. And she tells a story. I actually interviewed her. It's on one of my interviews. How she had to go to the bathroom during one of the meetings, and he offered to take her.
Oh my gosh!
And she went with him in the end. And when they came back, she felt they had developed some trust. And she turned to him and she said, "Let me ask you a question. How did you do what you did? You were a mass murderer." He said, "I'll tell you. Everybody was doing it. If I didn't do it, they were going to murder me and my family." That was his response.
Well, I'll tell you a different side of that. The Germans, the officers, the SS men at all these death camps, and the ones who were murdering Jews, killing them in other ways, they always would say, if I hadn't done it, they would have killed me. Yeah. There was never, ever a single case of any guy who didn't like what was going on getting killed. You know what they did? Mm-hmm. If a guy said, I can't take this anymore, it's making me extremely nervous, anxious, and unhappy and depressed, they sent the guy for rest and rehabilitation at a spa.
Yes, I've heard that.
So it's different. They were much more directly brutal. Not that the Nazis weren't directly brutal, but it was different in Rwanda. I mean, your neighbor was turning on you, who you lived with, and slashing you to pieces. That's another kind of brutality. It's not that the Germans didn't do things like that, like killing babies and shoving in horrible ways and smashing them, but mostly they tried to make it into a systematic thing. That's what German technology was like. But I don't understand how somebody, especially a former neighbor, could physically go up to your neighbor and commit the most horrendous physical atrocities one-on-one. And that's what Hamas did. And when I think of those guys who were totally fanatically indoctrinated and told that they have to give their blood for the movement, which is in order to get the leaders of Hamas installed in power and as much money as possible. So all these kids are still indoctrinated and brainwashed. It's child abuse. That they could go out hysterically, fanatically, and cheer and go up to another human being or a bunch of human beings and like the gang rapes where they broke the pelvises of the Israeli women. And then how could they do that? And then call home, Mom, I just, killed 10 Jews.
10 Jews, yeah.
And how could the UN, I'm sorry, I'm going free all over the place. How could the UN and the women's, the UN Commission for Women's Rights or something, they would not say that Hamas had committed crimes of rape. They would not acknowledge it. They were pressed again and again. They got out of it with measly, smarmy comments to deflect it. They had to be pushed by outraged Jewish women and the wife of the president of Israel, Mrs. Herzog, I believe it was, I forget the last name,
Mm-hmm.
and who wrote an op-ed piece, until they had a big meeting in the UN and they had forensic analysis evidence brought in, and then they acknowledged, yes, and even then they still downplayed it, but they acknowledged, yes, horrendous things took place. And of course, the Orthodox came in and immediately buried the women's bodies, because you're supposed to bury someone right away. Unfortunately, they were burying the evidence too,
Yes.
which generated more, it's Israeli propaganda, which a lot of students said. They just take it for granted Israel is going to be issuing propaganda. You can't believe anything they say. That angered me so much that the women's groups and organizations around the country, as well as at the UN, did not stand up for the women who had been abused so horrendously and murdered. That made me so angry. And that doesn't mean that I don't have great sympathy for Palestinian civilians who are being bombed into smithereens. It's not the same kind of violence. It's not going up to them and slashing them into pieces. The military often, you bomb people, right? It's like they're ants down there, and you bomb them, and you have a sense of dissociation from them, being disassociated, whatever. And then there's a lot of, the fighting man to man, I guess, and it's awful. And I don't want to say it's not terrible, and they haven't suffered horrendously. And I don't support Netanyahu, and I don't support the settler movement. And maybe people out there do and don't want to hear me say this, but I don't. I think it gets in the way of what would have been a two-state solution. But you got to do something with the Palestinians. You can't rule over them forever. When Moshe Dayan realized that they had conquered the West Bank and all these people, he said, "What are we going to do with these people? What have we done?" But they had to do it. So I don't discount it, but the provocation was there. The years of failing to compromise when there were possibilities of compromise, the need to focus on your own families and your homes and say, I'm a Palestinian. I have a home. I don't want it to be destroyed because there's violence going on or because the PLO or Hamas are instigating it. I want to have economic prosperity. I want to compromise. I want to have good things happen. I don't want to have an ideology of nihilism that I want to build something good. I don't want everything to be destroyed, and I don't want to be a martyr. Hamas made every Palestinian a martyr for their cause. They said it's okay to be an involuntary martyr because it serves the cause, and they must shed their blood for it. It's a sick, fanatical.
Yeah, I mean, we do diverge in certain areas of Israel, the Jewish people, and politics. That much I will say. But we'll leave that for another interview because we actually have a number of things that I wanted to cover. So at some point soon, we'll have to do a part 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I do want to mention that you're an author, and you've written some very interesting stuff, which again I'd like to touch on in another time. One is called A Magical Modern Hasidic Tale of the Holocaust, how Holocaust martyr Shmuel Ziegelbaum saved my life, and that's just one of them. You're also an award winner. You won the Spirit of Anne Frank Human Rights Award. So what I want to tell you is, as we conclude this interview, is that you carry an awful lot with you. I think you've gone into territories, uncharted territory for many Jews, as an example, that stroll through the concentration camp and then in the jails meeting with former SS, and you've seen it firsthand.
And I did track them down free too.
It's incredible what you carry inside of you. you're a curator, but you're also a museum of sorts, right?
I'm a walking museum.
You really are. Like, you have a lot that you carry with you, and I want to wish you well done, or in Yiddish they say Yishakoach,
Thank you.
for being vocal, for being an activist, for
Thank you.
speaking loudly against the atrocities of Nazi Germany and other atrocities around the world.
Yes.
I can only imagine that that must weigh very, very heavily on you. So here's the good news. As I tell all my guests over the last few months, I've been playing around with ChatGPT AI a little bit.
Yeah, me
And
too.
have you also? Good for you. And every time I have a guest on, I ask AI to write a poem about that guest. So I have a poem which is Ode to Jud Newborn.
No.
Yes, and it goes like this. In the heart of New York, where stories intertwine, a voice echoes softly, but its reach is divine. Jud Newborn, a scholar, a keeper of light, a historian whose passion ignites the night.
Oh my gosh.
Through centuries of sorrow, through pages of pain, he weaves the past lesson again and again. A curator of truth in history's vast halls, he stands as a guardian, answering the calls. The Holocaust, the shadow still lingers in mind, yet Jud ensures its memory we cannot leave behind. At the Museum of Jewish Heritage, he sowed the seeds of remembrance, of courage, of humanity's needs. With Sophie Scholl, a story of bravery and grace, he brought forth the white rose, its message to trace. Young hearts, once swept by Nazis' cruel command, now rise as symbols, defying the land. A bridge of compassion built from the past, Jud knows that these lessons they must ever last. For empathy blooms where history is learned, and from darkness to light, our hearts can be turned. In the tapestry woven with threads of the brave, Jud's voice is a beacon, a light for the saved. He teaches us all with unwavering grace that through knowledge we find our shared human place. So here's to the scholar who dares to recall the stories of suffering, the rise and the fall. With his wisdom, the world finds a way to unite, for history through him still burns very, very bright.
Oh
What do you
my
think?
God. What do I think? I can't believe it. You fed him the You fed them the information. And they came up with
I
that.
did, Jud Newborn. I did.
That's because of you, and I want to thank you for those words and that understanding. I'm deeply moved, and I've never had a poem written about me like that.
It's nice,
Maybe
isn't it?
it's very long to go on my tombstone, but maybe the first verse and the last verse.
Yeah, you'll have to have one of those flat ones like outside of Jerusalem.
Right. But that's beautiful. And thank you so very much. It's lovely for someone to appreciate another person, and
Yes.
I think I have to feed in your information now, because you're a wonderful human being, and I know what you've done. I know your background,
Thank you.
and see what comes out. And gosh, ChatGPT maybe isn't so scary and dangerous after all.
I will tell you, Judd, I've had many responses to it. I interviewed Bob Ray, who's Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, and I did similar with him. And he kind of said, well, that's nice. It's kind of soft, but I like it. And then on the other hand, I just interviewed someone earlier today, a lovely, lovely woman, Becca Slider, who was once a pastor and now is a free woman, as she describes it. And ChatGPT wrote this most exquisite poem about where she had come and finding her freedom and all the beautiful things that she's done. And she was crying. She had tears rolling down her cheek. It was really quite something.
I had a couple moments there where
Right. I'll send you the poem when I
please.
send you the link.
Okay.
And with that, I really, really want to thank you so much for being part of this. You know what? I ask people, please, to take out of these interviews something that affects them, something that they can run with. And I think in your case, as a synopsis of your life in this interview, if you will, is that you've been very, very tenacious. And you've really, really wanted to find out, as you said before, what was the reason for the Holocaust? How could it possibly happen? And you dove right in, you got your hands real dirty, and just that image of you walking through the concentration camps late at night by yourself. I'll be honest with you, Judd, I could not do that. Doesn't matter if I was younger or older, I would not be able to do that. So
Yeah.
for your bravery and for your courage, and I also want to thank your parents for raising a good boy. They did a good job. They did
Thank
a
you
good
very
job.
much.
You're
Well, I'm
welcome.
going to have to put on my tefillin tomorrow because I haven't been that good a boy.
Yeah, I want you to zoom me when you have your tefillin on. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I really want to do it too.
You know what? I
It's,
started putting on my tefillin twice a week with a friend of mine in Kitchener,
yeah.
and there are times where I can't wait to take it off because I don't like tight things on me, clothing or tefillin.
Yeah.
But when I'm wearing it, there is this great sense that I'm doing something special. Judd, today I was at a conference with my sister on Torah, and it was very, very beautiful. It was at a local yeshiva here. And the woman who spoke in the end, she talked about how a woman whose son was a hostage in Gaza, she was in his room cleaning up one day, and there on the top shelf in his closet, she saw his tefillin. And she thought to herself, you know what? Somebody should be wearing that tefillin. So she posted in social media in Israel, I want someone to wear my son's tefillin every single day. And she got something like 300 responses. And subsequently, this man took the tefillin and has worn them every single day since. And another mother of another hostage did the same thing. And I thought, my God, something mystical about that.
There is. There is. Um, this is a little different, but my father was brave, and he also had lots of fear in World War II. But he put on his tefillin every day
Did he?
in World War II. Yeah, and he must have looked really weird to some of the other men in the barracks.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
But
yeah.
and can you imagine being brave enough to do that? I mean, show yourself with these bizarre things on your head, but he did. And my father grew up Orthodox. And
Oh, did he really?
Yeah, he did. His first language was Yiddish when he was a little boy, because his parents came from, they were all first, from Poland. And and the teacher said to him in school, he went in first and he spoke Yiddish in school. She said, "Not here, none of that here." And then he thought, "Oh my God, Yiddish is bad." So
We will touch on that next time. But as a segue,
I have to do
I like to conclude my shows with by saying Zeigesind, which means go in health. Das
Thank
Vidanya, Russian for goodbye, and anything else of Vida Zane. And we wish people well, and we thank them so much for coming to this podcast. Please be in touch at avrum.rosensweig@gmail.com. Until then, once again, thank you so much to my guest, Jud Newborn. You did a beautiful job, and I look forward to doing this a part B down the road. Thank you.